Thanks, Oscar. Good afternoon and welcome to the May 10th Facilities Improvement meeting of the School Board Facilities Improvement Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So joining us from here on out, I believe, we have Jess Abona, who is a third grade teacher at GMS. She's going to be helping us out as a teacher representative as we discuss the GMS project. And we have a few members in attendance here. We have Dan Mitchell, Jen Grantham, both principals in the district. Brian Burke is the representative from the budget committee. And Doug Totten is our business administrator. We also have Kyle Barker here tonight, who is our architect. And joining us remotely, we have Superintendent Mike Jetty, Facilities Director Dave Ross, Suzanne Angarano from, Basin Studios. Sorry, Suzanne. And Jen Grantham. Oh, Jen is also projecting the meeting. Sorry, she's here.
I'm in two places at once, so I want to learn how to do that.
Oh, Kevin's here.
Oh, hi, Kevin. Join us. Come have a seat. We also have Kevin Lynch, who is the representative from the school board. Select board.
Yep. Sorry I'm late.
That's all right. We just started. So first on our agenda tonight, we have the LMS update.
Great, yeah, so we meet once a month now while there's really very little work going on at LMS. We met today, and they're still ready to remobilize on June 19th, get going in with the kitchen work as well as the cafeteria work. Everything's been coming in as far as the equipment, and so that's all looking good for hopefully a straight type of renovation this summer without too many or if any surprises type of thing. Solar will be starting to go up June or July or August, so they're finishing up some of their last part of engineering. Then it has to go through the permit, and then they'll be putting it on the roof at that point. We are waiting, like other people are waiting, for a main transfer or switch for the whole power for LMS. As of right now, that is scheduled to come in December, and that will impact the actual functioning of the solar. So right now obviously we're functioning without it, but in order for solar to be up and running and not interfering with the grid, when it's not supposed to interfere with the grid as far as safety and things like that go, for Eversource, there is a switch that needs to come in, and like a lot of projects, that switch is just out many months. So we got some phone calls in to see if that will be sooner than December, but that's where we're at right now. Other than that, things have been up and running now pretty smoothly as far as what's been in place.
It's been, actually, the students and staff are discussing how comfortable the building feels, as we've had a couple of hot stretches this spring. That climate control, that humidity removal is really working to help make the environment really feel great. Don't even need to have windows open, which keeps the pollen out, which is also great. And having that, true level of comfort, both heating and climate control for that humidity removal.
I'm sure that's helpful for testing season as you guys enter that.
We have been in testing season this week, so definitely it has been nice to not have the windows open to hear, the lawnmower going by or the helicopter with the guy dangling underneath it going down the power lines. That was very entertaining last week. I'm glad that was last week and not this week. The only other LMS update that is technically a facilities discussion, but not really in the old building and grounds information, I just wanted to thank again publicly while we have a moment, NOAC Construction and Landscaping, who did come by to our school and help to fix our fields that were vandalized by a off-road vehicle. We had deep trenches in the field. It's a leach field, yes, but it is a field that our students use to play and practice on, and it was very nice of them to come out and help to support, our students to be able to use that space.
No, definitely, a big thank you for that, yeah.
Great.
So that's where we're at with LMS.
So
Great.
once that switch comes in, let's say it comes in December 1st, how long before it's in place and it's in operation?
I would think a week or two, so it's not,
I'm just
because
wondering-
everything will be ready for it to be connected, unconnected, then connected
Right.
type of thing. So everything will be in place and ready to go. And
So we're gonna miss
the
part of
solar
it.
people continue to talk with the North Branch people, including the subcontractors out for electrical, to make sure that if there's a workaround, we can find that workaround, but if there's not, that we'd be ready to go when that switch comes in.
So we're gonna be missing part of the heating season again.
We possibly could be, so, yeah.
We're just saying December, which could turn into January or February.
Yep,
That's a supply chain issue?
it is, yeah.
All right.
Let's keep our fingers crossed and hope it comes in early.
Did they indicate, I'm sorry, I missed today's meetings with testing and all the students needing places to be and spaces to go. Missed the meeting today, but did they talk about, in regards to installing the panels, it should be done before students are back in place in August, or are we on the fence on that one as well?
They believe it should be done before students are back in place, so, yep.
That is our,
Boots on the roof. The boots on the roof.
I really would like to not have the elephant ballet on the roof again this year. Next year, we'd like to start the year with no construction, but understand supply chains are what they are, and we'll get there.
Well, thanks for the update.
I asked a question specifically about, North Branch backing out of the project and getting all the lawns reseeded and all of that work. And Kay really indicated that everything would be up on the roof at that time. I guess I didn't probe further to say in its proper place, but the goal is, I believe, to get all that done so that when school returns, everything's there. It's just waiting to tie over once that switch. Apparently, there's one manufacturing facility in Missouri that makes this one switch, and it's not scheduled to be manufactured until December. It's like, I wanted to just make one. We only need one, but they're not at our beck and call, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Who's
Right.
got control of the volume?
I don't think the volume's coming through, so.
It's not, it's coming through
So-
Jen's speaker, yeah, because I had it all the way up to, at 100.
And I'm turning it down because we're getting that horrible noise, which seems to
Okay.
be
I can-
associated with the volume. So if Jen turns up the volume on her computer,
Mine's at 100%. Can you hear my computer?
No.
Okay. Mike, can you talk for a second?
I can talk, but it might be my voice that's causing the problem, given the way I sound at the
The
moment.
louder she's been.
How's mine coming in, Jen? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yep.
the problem is it's only coming through her laptop, nowhere else.
Yep, I understand.
It says it's going to the Intel audio, which
So
is
Doug,
there.
once they start the kitchen, how long will it take to complete that job? They must have an idea, right, of,
Yeah, so we're gonna get, they're gonna send to us pretty soon more of their discrete timelines as far as renovating it out and then putting in the different equipment in place. But they know that not only do we wanna finish before the school year's ready, but give the kitchen people a
They're not
couple
talking
weeks
right.
to get in there and get used to the new facility. Because again, we're going from being able to reheat to actually being able to cook food, which is a big change for the middle school. So they plan on being
There's no one in the closet.
backwards out from our start date by a couple weeks, so we can get in there before that.
it's gonna take them that long to do the kitchen?
Well, they always give us a worst-case scenario, and then they tend to beat it pretty much all the time,
Well,
as far as
it's-
North Branch does.
It's the conversation, not just the kitchen, it's also the cafeteria and the stage area. None of that has been done either, so all of that up in the ceiling work in those areas would also have to be completed this summer. And then there's the tie-in for the electrical that I know that they talked about in the late winter, early spring, about needing to shut off electric for a whole week, this summer.
And with the kitchen, the cooler is now, the walk-in cooler is now outside, the new one, so they're gonna reclaim all that space, so it's a little bit more of a reno than, say, our classrooms were, where when you're looking at the reno, you're mainly looking up. This, you're gonna be looking up, down, and all the way around.
Sometimes you can't just sledgehammer an old walk-in. That's gotta be taken out piece by piece.
All right, any other comments on LMS? All right, let's move on then to the GMS discussion on consolidation. Hi, Kyle.
So I'm on, huh? All right, well, so the first thing I wanted to do was apologize for not sticking to the script. I was asked specifically to look at one option. I ended up doing an extra 4 options. I think it's important to show the other alternatives, to get some discussion going and show the pluses and minuses, the pros and cons for each, in order to make sure that the decision that's made is an informed decision. I'm also going to ask for a little bit of patience in that I don't want to just do the 4 options. I want to go back to the beginning and actually kind of walk through the previous 5 options, so that way there's a little bit of perspective and some history there. And it's also important to note some of the things that have changed in the last couple of years since we started this, and how it may impact the work that we're doing. So again, we're going to start right from the beginning and go to the enrollment projections. And what's up on the screen, you're going to have a tough time seeing that. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, they're nice.
What's up on the screen is simply the historic enrollments going back to 2011, but also the births in town since 2010. And I did look up the 2007, 2008, and 9 as well. And what I discovered is that this year's births, or last year's births, 2020, it's 18 children higher than it was the year before. And it's the highest birth count in the town in almost 15 years. And if you look back 15 years plus ago, the birth rates were up in the 70s and 80s. And then during the 2000s, 2010 to 2020, stayed in the mid-60s. When you look at the last 5 years, they're the 4 highest birth counts in the last 15 years. Somebody said that, and I actually heard a report that said it was the opposite.
Yeah, in both ways. That's why I said it.
People didn't want to bring kids into a COVID world, and so actually 2020, which would be the COVID year,
Exactly.
is the low one.
Yeah.
And then now, 2 years later, COVID's passed and people get busy, and we've got more kids coming. Go to the next slide. Actually, if you could skip this one and go to the next one for a second. I want to explain what we're just talking about. In that, if you look at this chart, this shows the different generations. This is a population pyramid that goes by age group. This is actually dating back 6 years, so it's a little bit different now. But you can clearly see this bump is the baby boom generation. And then this smaller bump here is the baby boomers' kids, or the millennials. The in-between dip is the X generation. And those people, because there's fewer of them, are having fewer kids. Those are the kids that are in the system now. So ergo, if you push that forward 10 years, the millennials, they're just starting to have kids. They're getting, well, this says that they're peaking at 20 to 24, but this is 6 years old, so they're actually 25 to 30, and they're getting to the age where they are starting to think about kids. They're having them later in life, they're having fewer of them, and over a longer period. And so this bubble, or wave form, is going to continue with another wave coming through, but it's going to be shorter and it's going to be flatter. But what this does is it shows you how across the country, the reason why we've had a decline in enrollments isn't because the kids suddenly disappeared. It's because there's the generation having those kids are fewer, but it means that the next coming years it's going to increase. I made this presentation to this group a year and a half ago, and if you go back to the chart there, the historic enrollments, I think that is why we're seeing this steady increase in births, that we are coming to that. We're beginning to see the start of that increase because of the millennials finally coming around to having families. What this means, though, is that if you project the start of the bubble at 2018, 5 years from there is 2023. These kids are going to be in kindergarten next fall.
Yep.
This 84 is going to be in kindergarten 5 years from now, or 4 years from now at this point. 84 is over the cutoff for 4 kindergarten classrooms. If you scroll to the next page, just to describe this for a second, it shows the blue line is the births, and the red line is the kindergarten 5 years later. So you can see that the kindergarten number is higher than the births. So if there's 84 being born in the town, that means there's going to be 90 showing up for school in 5 years. If this trend continues, the dashed lines are trend lines. If that trend continues, you will see an increase, a steady increase in enrollment past the year 2024 and into the 2030s.
No more spikes, but just a steady.
It's going to be more of a rolling.
Yeah.
It'll peak around where you're at or where you were at before.
Because the millennial generation, instead of everyone all having kids in their mid-20s, they're spacing it out from their mid-20s all the way to their early 40s.
Absolutely, and even further. I've heard people having kids into the mid-40s and later. So, I know, ouch. Huh?
Oh, thank you.
So, but the point is that I think with this knowledge, we can pretty accurately predict what your peak is going to be, and we should be designing to that peak. When we were talking last year, we were actually thinking about trying to scale things down to save space, to save money, and I'm starting to feel nervous about that we should not be designing for 4 classrooms per grade when we know you've got 84 kids that's going to turn into 90 coming, and you're going to need 5, if not 6 kindergarten classrooms pretty quickly. That's going to happen, and so we need to be prepared for that. Go to the next slide. And keep going. And so this one looks at that change from births to kindergarten and then all the way through the system. And what's interesting about this is it shows very clearly here, you've got an 8% increase from birth to kindergarten, another healthy increase from kindergarten to first grade. So you got some kids that are going to private kindergarten, but then they show up at first grade. Then from there on through, there's about a 1 to 2%, here's a 3%, almost 4%, up to 8th grade. 8th grade on, it's almost dead flat, a up to 1% decline. But that's typical in high school. You've got some kids that drop out or go to a private school. High schools often show a slight decline. But overall, throughout all the grades, you've got a 1 to 2% increase year after year.
Curious, what was the 3%? I just can't. Was it 5 to 6?
Yes.
Okay.
No, 4 to 5.
4 to 5. Okay.
What I'm doing here is, the other thing you can look at is, there's 1 year where there was a decrease, the COVID year. Obvious.
Yeah.
Kids are staying home, homeschooled, going to private school, not coming here. But then you had an increase the following year. That year is causing a aberration in the numbers because we use a 5-year average all 5 years, which includes the COVID year, and we also use a 3-year weighted, which right now is including the COVID year. If we go out 1 more year and the COVID drops off the 3-year weighted, I think you'll see the 3-year weighted come up. Because right now it's showing a decline in some of these grades that I really think if we took out the COVID year, you'd see an increase.
So that's over the next 5 years you're looking at, the overall decline of 1 to 2%?
The 5 years showing a 2% increase over all the grades.
Yep.
and the 3-year is showing only a 1%
Increase,
increase.
okay.
There's an average decrease though, because we have the deflated year of COVID,
I
which
see.
is factored
Okay.
into the 5-year rolling.
All right.
It's factored into both. And so if we get one
Okay.
more year out, I think the 3-year weighted is going to be more of a 2-year, they're 2% increase,
2%, okay.
like the 5-year is.
Okay.
So the point of this is I think the 5-year is a bit more accurate than the other two. The simple one is saying if there's no immigration into town, you close the doors and nobody comes in and nobody leaves, what does it look like? And you'll see in a second that it's you see in the charts that it's a very much lower number. So the point I'm trying to make is that Litchfield appears to be very desirable. There's a lot of people moving in. When we were talking the other day, it sounds like there's some new developments going in. New developments aren't the ones having kids, it's the people that inhabit it. So you can't say that if you have a bedroom, it's going to have a kid in it. Sometimes those bedrooms are offices. I have a 3-bedroom house. My wife has 1 bedroom as her office. I have the other bedroom as my office. We don't have kids. But the point is that going back to the births, the demographics, and then these predictions, we can safely say Litchfield is growing, and that whatever students you have in the system, year after year, they're going to increase. Even though the births from 5 years ago seemed low, at some point it's going to catch back up to where you were at a few years ago. Again, I went over this a couple years ago, but I wanted to make sure people understood that this new information about the births, I think, is really important, and we need to be taking it seriously. All right, so moving on. Yeah, you're going to have to zoom out on this one a little bit. What I'd like to do is to go over the plans of each of the schools, so that way people understand what some of the challenges are if we make some changes to it. In the past, I pretty much only studied the elementary school. I had looked at the middle school at one point in time, but only recently have actually studied the high school. And I found some interesting things about it. I did look at the space utilization. The classrooms right now are utilized at about a 67% space utilization, meaning that out of 7, or actually it's a 5-period curriculum, that 1 period a day, usually the class is not occupied. This is typical. A typical high school is somewhere between 70 and 75%. At 65, there may be 1 open room, 2 at sometimes, but it's not like there's a ton of extra classrooms that you could just move students into.
Kyle, can you just repeat what that number was, the percentage that we're at?
Current space utilization for classrooms is 67%.
Okay.
And that's a little bit low, but pretty typical to other schools.
Okay.
And can I just clarify for everyone? That's at any given time, so
Right.
those rooms could be used and function at different times of the day. It's not like
Right.
we have 33% of the building just sitting there vacant all the time. Just at first period, we're using 67%. At second period, we're using 67%, and it could be different ones, and it could be one of the rooms that was vacant last period, but it's now. So it's not just, a third just sitting there unused all the time.
And to that point, you don't want to be more than 80% efficient, because then there's never an available place to put students when you have that time that you need it. So 67% is not unreasonable. I don't know what the class sizes are. If the class sizes are small, if there's, say, a room that could hold 25 students and there's only 20 in there, well, you've got a little bit of room that you can add more high school students, but you're not going to add 7th and 8th graders to a high school classroom when it's already occupied. When we look at the building itself, the layout, it's kind of interesting. You've got on the right-hand side of the building, the cafeteria, not the cafeteria, the auditorium, the cafeteria, the gymnasium. Pretty much all the core facilities are on the right after you walk in the front of the building. On the left, we've got the main office area, which includes the SAU for right now, the library, and then what I'm grouping together and calling the industrial arts. So wood shop, consumer science, business, that kind of stuff is in this wing. So kind of educational on the left-hand side, core facilities on the right. If we go to the second floor, it's just all classrooms. So again, the classrooms are fairly well occupied. The core facilities, when I looked at the size versus the enrollments, it's oversized. That the gymnasium is large and it has a multipurpose room. The library is very large. The cafeteria is about where it ought to be, but overall, the core facilities are almost 2 times the size of what you would normally see for this enrollment. That's not unusual, though. Back in the 80s, or no, this was built in 2000. Back then, and still, I take the policy of designing the classrooms to the classroom capacity, but then designing the core facilities to a slightly higher number to allow for future additions, to allow for a bubble of population that comes through. You don't want, that 84 students, when it gets to high school, they're going to hit the cafeteria and the gym and all those spaces at a more intense level than a grade that only has 60 kids in it. So you want to design the core facilities for that top end. So actually, I think overall, the high school was designed well in terms of its program and its future use.
What were you saying about the gym being dual purpose or larger than
Well,
necessary?
there's the gym's fairly large,
Yeah.
and then next to it's a multi-purpose room. So you could have technically 3 classes going on at the same time. So if you've got a single gym, usually there's 2 side courts, so you could have 2 classes at the same time. But with the multi-purpose room, if you had, say we add 7th and 8th grade, and suddenly both courts are utilized by the high school, there's still the opportunity to have a 3rd class going on in the multi-purpose room.
Where's the multipurpose room?
The weight room? Might be no?
Well, now, I've only got the plans. I
I
don't
mean
know.
the small room where they keep the scoring table and stuff?
Go back to the previous page.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure what-
I don't know if it's still being used the way it was designed.
That corner?
This is the weight room.
Yeah.
That's a multi-purpose room.
So what's in there
It's
now?
small, but it's still 1,500, 2,000 square
I think they
feet.
use the multi-purpose room as the weight room.
I think so too.
This room right here,
Yeah.
this room right here is used for like the scorer's table and like there's coolers and
I
stuff
think
like
that's the weight room now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's almost like concession storage and like
Is
the
that, do you have access from the outdoors to that room?
I don't know.
the weight room you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The point being is that this whole area, for 400 students, it's a large space. There's enough space for more students to be able to utilize that area. So, moving on to the site plan for a second. So when we talk about, is there a possibility of doing an addition to the building? It makes a lot of sense if there's an addition that it would go out the end of the 2 wings and connect the 2. If what I was asked to look at is moving 7th and 8th grade from the middle school up to the high school. And if we did that, we would not be able to use a lot, if any, of the high school classrooms because the utilization is too strong right now. But I am saying that you could probably share the core facilities, the auditorium, kitchen, the gymnasium. There's some exceptions there that we need to think about, and I think it's important to put the educational side of things in mind. Do you work hard at keeping the 7th and 8th grade separate from the 9 through 12 kids? Or can they integrate when it gets to the core facilities? If we want to keep them entirely separate, we might want to start talking about a separate cafeteria, separate gymnasium space, and then suddenly we've got multiple additions going around the building. So it kind of comes down to that sweet spot between, getting the most from the educational standpoint, but at the same time being judicious about how much space we build. You don't need it because the core facilities are over-designed, but from an educational side, you need to think really long and hard about what your policy is going to be. So keep that in mind. This is the easiest, simplest solution. All right, going on to the,
Can I just speak
Yeah,
to
sure.
that solution also? Because I'm not sure that addresses another academic concern in here.
Yep.
Is that those 7th and 8th graders would need unified arts periods, which include music, art, I'm drawing a blank right now, tech ed, facts, we don't have facts.
Oh, yeah.
Computer science, Spanish,
It-
all of those components would still need to be part of it. and it would not need to be a full teacher. So that would get
Yep.
into a tricky,
I think it would work out pretty well because the current Unified Arts for the high school, the shop, I know is not utilized very strongly. Some of those spaces, based on my calculations, I've got behind this multiple worksheets where I look at the number of students enrolled versus periods per day for each of the curricular components, and then look at the number of teaching stations that would be necessary, and then apply a utilization rate on top of that so that it's not overly booked. And it seemed as though that wing had some capacity that if the junior high, now I'm calling it junior high because it's 7th and 8th, not middle school because middle school is typically 6th through 8th, that the junior high would have access from this side, the high school would have access from that side, so that you could have sort of a shared space without crossing paths with the two schools.
but also I just want to make sure the teachers are being considered in contractual obligations. So it's not just the physical space, but the number of preparations that they have
Right.
as part of their teacher collective bargaining agreement,
Gotcha.
and making sure that that's being honored and thought about.
That's a good point. That's a little bit beyond the my pay grade to analyze.
Yep.
But maybe what we can do is share those worksheets that I've got. It's called a Castaldi nomogram. It's written by a guy from back in the 50s, and I still use it as a way to calculate the number of teaching stations. But it doesn't take into account what you had just said, and it certainly doesn't take into account, like I said, that separation anxiety thing with trying to keep the 7th and 8th graders away from the high school.
Kyle, how many classrooms are in that addition that we're talking about right now in between the two?
But I'd have to look it up. I believe it's 10 to 15.
I was gonna say 10.
Yeah, it would,
There's that much space?
Didn't even number 10.
yeah,
Lines up
this is
good.
just diagrammatic.
Yeah.
Just diagrammatic.
So would it go all the way, when you have the two sections that come out, is that all that space in there?
I don't know. I really don't know. What I do have is, again, that worksheet that spells out how many teaching stations. I then have a space needs worksheet that says this number of teaching stations times this square footage, and it spits out a total number at the end. And I've got numbers for that total, and I just simply drew a box on here. I
Yeah.
didn't think about the size.
I'm also thinking too, in addition to the UAs, I'm thinking about service providers and support services that all has to be calculated in there as well.
Do we move out the SAU in this process? I don't know.
And where does it go?
And where does it go?
So this is definitely step one of possible
Right,
many.
right.
And when we asked Kyle to come in, we said, can you do more of the big picture today? And then we'll kind of keep going more and more granular after that, depending on where the group and where the town wants to go, type of thing.
Yeah, maybe this is only one story. It'd be nice to do two stories because it's going to be more efficient doing it that way because you've already got the elevator. But if we don't need it, then we don't build it. But I think what we're coming down to is that it's feasible. It's feasible to do this. And the 7th and 8th grade isn't going to add a lot of parking. It's going to be a few teachers. It's not going to add a lot to the utilization of the fields. It will add some. But I think that the overall design seems to be such that it can absorb some of that. We can keep going on, unless there's more questions about the site.
So you mentioned field usage.
Yeah.
I mean, with the high school, I think of all the different sports they play at all different times. I mean, I don't see where 7th, 8th would be able to slide in
Yeah.
and have any time. I'm thinking, because basically every team they have has a JV and a varsity team.
Right.
Take like right now, you're in baseball season, lacrosse season. So JV practices, varsity practices, I mean, that's gonna be all the time. Not only that, but with LMS, you have 5th and 6th grade, they will still play the sport. And 7th and 8th are up here, 5th and 6th are down here, so it's, one part of them will have to be bused somewhere.
Right.
Yep.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And that's for soccer, baseball, track, it's all sports. Lacrosse, now, yeah.
So there's some synchronicities, but there's also some conflicts.
Yeah.
And yeah, as what Doug said, that if a particular option here arises being the favorite one, we'd get more into the detail of it and I'd be able to answer those questions a little better.
So, I know it's just a block right now, but you ran numbers, so you know what you need for square footage.
Yes.
I mean, so do you have like dollars attached to like any of these? And I realize it's like,
I have started doing that, and the problem has become that basically the renovation portion, which ends up being a pretty significant thing, is very, very difficult to nail down, because it's not just, I can't just throw a square footage number at it, because it's not going to be accurate. And yeah, if we can go back to the high school first floor for a second, what's important about that is, all right, we add an addition here for the classrooms. Do we just call it done, or do we start to think about separating some of the core facilities, particularly when it comes to the cafeteria? The cafeteria, actually, the high school principal was on the call the other day and said, you know, the cafeteria is not that big for our current population. If you add another 200 students, that's going to make that really tough. What's even worse about that is that you really want to separate the 7th and 8th graders from the high schoolers in the cafeteria itself, because they're a little bit more free moving around, they're loud, it gets a little bit uncontrolled in there. Can we put in a divider to create two separate cafeterias? The answer is pretty much no, because if you put, say, 7th and 8th grade in this first piece, it's buried inside the building, there's no outside access, it's not a very nice space. Plus you get the high schoolers going by them through the line in order to get to their space, or vice versa, you have the junior high going through the high schooler space. It's just not a good setup. It's all because the cafeteria is so long and narrow with very little outside walls. So I started thinking, well, what if we took the music room, turned that into the junior high cafeteria? And that's on the opposite side of the kitchen. The kitchen can serve two different directions. Well, now you'll have two separate serving lines, staffed both sides. You have to renovate the music room and then build a new music room someplace. Does that move on to another part of the building, or do we do a little addition out the front? I mean, those are all the questions that I can't answer. We need to really sit down and think it through, and it could cause a project like this to balloon in cost really quickly. So there's not enough of the baseline assumptions settled in order to come up with the cost quite yet. But we can talk a little bit in terms of which one is going to be higher than the next. But I don't want to get into specifics. This one's 32 million, this one's 34 million, that type of stuff.
I also just want to come back to the elephant in the room of when we tried to send 8th grade up temporarily to the high school last year, there was a community outpouring and outcry that was not right for kids, it was not right developmentally, we shouldn't do it, we couldn't do it. And I like to keep bringing that back to the table, because it might sound easy, but there are so many logistics that you're talking about developmentally where kids are in 7th and 8th grade versus where they are in high school. And yes, there are other towns and districts that do it, but it's after a long-range plan, a long-range study of how you incorporate that junior high model, which is very different than the middle school model.
It's very different, and that's an important piece that the school board would have to grapple with, that this is not just a matter of warehousing the kids differently. This is a matter of policy and educational style. So that's a very good point, and it needs to be on our forefront of our thoughts. Anyways, so moving on to the middle school, we've got a lot to go through here. The middle school is a bit of a more difficult design issue.
That was said so
That
kindly.
was very politically correct.
It's very boxy. It's basically a big rectangle, right? And just like the high school, you can draw a line here and say core facilities in the front, classrooms in the back, educational side on this side. We've got regular classrooms here, 2 wings of regular classrooms here, and then some specialized classrooms in the middle. The main office is pretty much right in here.
Right here.
Yeah, and the library right behind it. And you got kind of these long corridor lobbies to get to the front. So if I were to pick where I think would be the best place to put it in addition, I would want to do something somewhere along this spine heading out either direction. The reason being is the other logical spot would be out the back here where the corridors end, you could just keep on going with that double-loaded corridor. That would probably be the cheapest and easiest. But then you start to get a really long distance from one end of the building to the next. So to try to get a little bit more surface to the building, we'd like to be able to expand out. But there's some challenges on the site if we tried to do that.
So Kyle, this is still part of the same picture where 7th and 8th move up
Yep.
to the high school, and then what grades are we looking at for?
Yeah, so right now I'm just studying the buildings, and I know kind of had to talk about 7th and 8th on the high school.
Yeah.
Here, I'm just
Okay,
whatever grades are here,
Boxes.
this is what we're
Okay.
facing against.
So one time, not that long ago, we talked about adding classrooms. You were involved with that, right? When we talked about putting on the front of the gym.
Yeah, I heard about that, but that was not my idea. And so, again, you think about, you've got the corridor system, 2 double-loaded corridors going left and right. You kind of have a little bit of a thing going on up here. Again, if I were designing it from scratch, I'd want to do a T across this direction in order to try to keep the classrooms clustered in groups. You don't want a first grade classroom here and a second grade classroom over here and a third grade. You want to try to group them together in something that makes sense so that professional learning communities and collaborative learning can actually happen. I call this Henry Ford style of learning, where you've got a corridor straight down and classrooms off of it. It's not it doesn't blend well with the current philosophies of education. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Nope.
Yeah. So if we go to the next slide, here's where it gets very tricky.
Oh, hang on.
Yeah, all these sheets are a little bit different size. That's probably pretty. Yeah, just up a little bit more. Up a little. Perfect. So the areas that I would want to put in addition out the left and the right, well, on this side, it's right close to the property line. And so very little room to be able to do anything there. If we went out the back, where it was probably the most expedient in terms of just efficiency, you've got very steep slopes pretty quickly out the back, so there's really not a lot of room. So coming out either of these sides, I think, is off the table. I'm pretty clear. This side, it's even worse, because you've got a large wetland area pretty close to the building, and the slopes are very, very steep. This would be very difficult to develop on this side. That includes all the way over here to the corner of the gym. That's where the septic comes out, heads to the septic fields. Pretty much these 3 sides are off the table as far as developability. So the only place to put it is where you had just mentioned, out the front of the gymnasium. Well, your office is way back here, and now the front of the building is going to be way out here. Now, I know you're going to ask, well, is that the rough size of the addition? And actually, that is. That one, the other one I didn't really measure. This one, I started looking at it, it's like, we need somewhere around 30,000 square feet. If you're going to move, and this is in the scenario where we make this a K through, or pre-K through 6, it's 67,000 square feet of existing. We need to add, by my calculations, about 36,000 of new construction. And so half again the size of this building, you'd be way out into the parking lot. If it were 1 story. If it were 2 stories, okay, we'd only be into the first layer of the parking lot.
And is there a place that's not good for building but viable for replacement of the parking that you've just taken? Because that's like 70% of the parking.
Yeah, just keep pushing it out.
You can head to the west on that one.
Okay.
Where the school
But-
was gonna be at one time.
right. We
So-
decided that
right.
wasn't suitable.
So yeah, I mean, there is area out here that we could push parking or construction or whatnot. But back again to the layout of the building, you put a whole bunch of classrooms out here. The first thing you come to when you drive up is the classrooms, not the main office, because the main office is way back where the M is in here. So that means we'd have to basically build a new main office, move that out, because Homeland Security requires you to come into the main office, not into the classroom areas. And then we renovate the main office into what? I'm not really sure, but you just renovated the school. Do we really want to be getting into that level of renovations on a school that's just been renovated?
Never
So it's-
mind the fact that the grade coming off the front of the building is
It's steep.
a pretty steep slope to the parking lot
Yeah,
as is.
It's,
I think it's
2,
18
4,
feet off grade.
6, 8. So it's possible maybe we could do
And underground.
two,
Two-story level.
right, a ground floor and then back up to the main level. So that's a possibility if the grades help us out that way.
That also, all that drainage needs to be replaced too.
So the
because
cars can
that's
come
all
and
failing.
roll right down into the first story.
It's a very awkward site.
It's all uphill.
And
Both
it,
ways.
an addition that size, I think would be, not a good idea.
In addition, you also didn't talk about the fact that we would need to add playground outside spaces for what you
Elementary
have to
kids.
have for the
Absolutely.
elementary kids that you don't necessarily have for the middle school
And
kids.
where would that go? Because again, you're pretty tight on the property line on two sides, wetlands on the upper side.
Litchfield.
Leachfield, I mean, yeah, I suppose we could.
The
put them
ATV showed us that it's pretty easy to turn that land.
How many square feet did you say it was, Kyle? 30?
Well, so kindergarten, first and second grade, that's, if we're designing to 100 students per grade, which is what we've been in our mind for a long time, confirmed with the birth rates that we just saw, that's 300 students times 120 square feet per student, which is pretty low. The new elementary school that we designed was like 180. So I'm keeping it pretty tight, saying we're gonna reutilize or share core facilities. So I'm keeping it tight at 36,000. That's still half the size of the existing building. That's a big addition for this building. So one other thing to keep in mind while we're on the sheet is that where we had planned on putting the new school way back when, that's still available. That's open, it's flat, it's buildable. Keep in mind, it still has, and we'll get to this when we get to the options, it has all the issues that we had come up with when we'd studied it last time. High water table, close proximity to the bluff, close proximity to some wetlands, and takes up all the room that you would have for the play space and that kind of stuff that we were just talking about.
And a single access still in
Right.
and out.
The single act, you get through a residential neighborhood here for the main entrance in, and then you would have to add that emergency exit out through the, is it an assisted living facility?
Yep.
Out
It's
the back. That
50
would,
Or a $2 million driveway.
Right.
I don't even,
Charles Bancroft.
I don't even think that would be viable. I don't think
Yeah.
you get permitted. So I'm saying that you'd have to do
Okay.
that through the residential neighborhood.
And
This one's just K through 6, right? This is with 7, 8 out?
Yeah, we'll talk about, there's a few other options there we
Is that
discussed.
what this is?
No, this is just studying where all the options might fit into this.
Right,
But this large thing would be the case through 6.
and where's 7 and 8?
So all the
At
new
the high school.
options have 7 and 8 at the high school.
high school.
So the
Right.
first 5, and then we have other ones that have 7 and 8 at the high school. While you're on this page, we talked about the new construction could be 1 or 2 floors, but we wouldn't want to add on to make a second floor where the school is currently.
Yeah, I was asked if, instead of here, we couldn't just put it here, like right on top of the existing. And that gets asked almost every project. And here's the problem, is that, particularly with the age of this building, I was drafting schools back in 1988 when this was built, and I know how the walls were built, and they were not built for seismic loading. They were not built for adding a second floor. And so we could not bear a new floor on those walls. You'd have to put in columns and build a new floor on top of that. So you're basically building a building on stilts over the top of another building. That gets very, very expensive. Plus,
Pretty ugly.
and yeah, it'd be kind of weird. Plus, what you've also got is mechanical, electrical, plumbing that comes down through the floor. And so all the spaces below, you would have to rip out the ceilings in order to get that.
The brand new ceilings and the brand new roof that we just did.
To get the services up there, and then you're pouring,
Yeah.
and then you're pouring concrete onto the deck, which has holes in it, and the concrete would drip through into the rooms below. So you'd have to really almost gut rehab the rooms below in order to put the building on top of it.
Well, and I think that, I mean, my first question as a parent is, where do all those kids go while all of this is happening?
All these
I mean,
options.
you've lived through construction all this year, and it has not
2
been.
years.
That was minor.
And that was
Yeah.
minor,
And that was
right?
minor.
Right. But if we're building do you do it in phases? You'd have to.
Well, let's
Like,
get
this
to
is
the
a
option.
nightmare for me.
Let's get to the options. I got one more school to go through.
Okay.
And this is where it gets frustrating, because we're gonna talk about GMS for a second. So if we can,
Portable school.
so if we can go to the next page, you can just stay at that level for a second. We're familiar with the layout of the building. You've got Griffin, the 40s and 50s wing, and then the 1980s-ish wing here. If you go to the next page, we're going to talk about the site for a second.
It's damn.
In that, a year and a half ago, when we were looking at this, and I looked at the option of renovating Griffin, what I came up with was we really need to demolish the 40s and 50s wing because it's 2 feet lower in elevation and it's 2 feet closer to the groundwater on this side.
Never got wet there.
You never got wet there?
I was there when it was being.
I slip and slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we got rid of that though, suddenly there's space here that some drainage, some play areas, there's things that we could do there. There's actually
So
some
at
room.
this point, you're talking about having it have less students or less grade levels than it currently does.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So kind of recapping what we discovered before, but now we've got a new lens to put on this view, and suddenly we've got some more options. If there's an addition, it would be a much smaller addition because we get fewer students. It would have less impact on the parking. There'd be 40% less students. Those students are 40% smaller because they're lower grades. There's 40% less cars. There's 40% less play area required. Suddenly, we could have more space up in this area where we can move the activity away from 3A. There's even some room back in the woods here that cleared out. I think the wetlands is drawn wrong on this map because the flagged wetlands are back here, but they're calling wetlands up here. I think that was, we'd have to investigate, but I think there's a little bit more room that we could have in the backside of this. If we change the focus of the building from facing the road to facing the back, maybe we can make it safe with the fewer number of students. We couldn't do it when it was K4, but I'm wondering if in a different grade configuration it could work.
So you're talking K3, K2?
K2,
K2.
K2, so where's 3, 4?
At the middle school.
middle school.
And
So we have a
Every-
3
so
through
that's that
6.
whole construction of the middle school.
Basically-
Right.
Then 7, 8 up.
This
So
is
you're-
doing
you're
projects
construct-
at all 3 schools.
Right, so you're,
That's one of the options that
All three.
I'm gonna get through the pros and cons.
Which
that's
wasn't-
less than a new school.
And it wasn't the question. The question was consolidating to 2 sites.
Right.
Not maintaining 3 sites.
Right. Right. So, moving on.
Yeah, but.
And, again, just showing how that would work in the floor plan. And one of the things I want to point out is if Griffin were renovated, it would not look like the Griffin that you all know and love right now. It would be much different. What we would do, some of the things that have been deemed unfixable, like, the moisture and that kind of stuff, there are things we can do given enough money, such as basically dig down to the footings, put in a new skin on the building, insulation on the outside of the brick, all the way up from footings to the roof, and then cover that in siding. So instead of a brick institutional looking building, you would have a more residential style construction. We'd have more options in terms of colors and patterns on the walls, and it would be very energy efficient. I did exactly this on a building up in Laconia. It's not a school, it's an assisted living facility called Sunrise House. It was an old brick building, old 1950s brick building, completely reskinned it. It looks entirely different. And it functions very well. So that there is that is possible. All right, so if we
So
go
something to note for the people watching from home, because it's probably a little bit smaller there. So when Kyle's talking about demolition, he's not talking about demolishing the 1930s building. So the 1930s building would stay. As of right now, it's not renovated for anything, but it would not be demolished. So that's not in the plans of anything at
It's just
this
that
point.
40s and 50s wing.
Yeah.
And would that address the moisture issues as well?
Yes, I believe it would. Because by tightening up the building,
It's that subterranean part of the building where you really feel like you're.
exactly, get rid of the worst part of
It's
the
the
building.
52, 56, and 63 edition.
Yep.
Okay, so that
Part of
that,
64.
that long corridor would remain, and that doesn't see the same moisture issues as
Ironically, the
back of the
carpeted part of the building.
Right.
Right.
And-
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that for my own.
And by digging down to the footings, putting in insulation and foundation drains, you don't have foundation drains right now. And the roof drains come out and dump the water right on the edge of the building. And back into the building. So if we took a pipe and collected all that and brought it further out into the woods, I think you would solve a lot of those problems.
The south side of that building's got a deep swale.
Yes.
All the way around through it.
Yes. Well, and another thing I was thinking is that one of the problems we had back before with fixing the moisture problems is that the drainage, when it gets to the highway, gets constricted. And so getting the moisture, getting the water, the runoff off the site is difficult, if not
You're
impossible.
saying constricted because of the pipe size?
The pipe size and the overgrowth.
Yeah, the vegetation,
Yeah.
you're gonna maintain a ditch.
Yeah. So even if you were to clean it up to the pipe, you gotta get the
Clean on
pipe,
that side.
and then you gotta get on the other side, which is somebody else's problem.
Which is a conservation area, which they'll let you do anything.
Yeah. Well, and so
I'm just saying, I'm out loud.
by taking this down,
Yeah.
if we could put in a drainage structure, we can infiltrate the water on-site, away from the building, and not have to worry about getting it off-site at all. So there's multiple things that get solved when you attack it as a whole. All right, so now we're gonna go through one option at a time, starting at the beginning. And that is the do-nothing option.
Well,
And-
can we just hang on so we can make sure everybody can see what we're talking about?
Yes.
Old print?
So
Sorry
this is
for my
going back
driving.
to the 5 options that were explored beginning of the project, or is this
Yes.
the consolidation idea?
Nope, we're gonna start from the beginning, the 5 options that we went with before, only very quickly so that we kind of familiarize ourselves with it. And, to put some perspective on, and also to update. If we were to start putting some costs to all these, I would put costs to all the ones way back to number 1, because inflation and enrollment projections have changed. And so our costs are gonna change. So with option 1, it was repairs only. It doesn't fix any of the educational problems. It doesn't fix some of the building problems. It only takes care of the worst things. The reason why we ever included it, because this is not really viable, it was to show that there's a cost for doing nothing, and it was substantial. It was substantial. It's still the lowest cost, upfront cost, but when you look at the life cycle cost over time, it ends up being the highest, because you're kicking the can down the road, and you're gonna have to deal with some of this stuff anyways. And inflation is gonna beat you, and you don't get state aid, because you're not doing what you need to in order to meet those requirements for state aid. And we didn't talk, we talked about it before the meeting, but just to mention that the district did get a letter of intent to fund from the state. It gave a range of somewhere, I think it was 5.8 million up to 7 million. The range is based on what construction costs are at the time of construction. Because of inflation's been so high in the last couple of years, my prediction is that when they recalculate the numbers, you will get the full 7 million. No matter what project that we're looking at, you'll get $7 million worth of state aid.
Well, as you talk about, no matter what project, as long as it's solving the problem.
As long as it's solving the
currently
problems.
happening. Yep.
It would not apply to option number 1. So we go to option number 2, and that was the renovations. So additions, renovations, K4. At the time, we said this was not viable because it still leaves you with problems, and it still leaves the building too close to 3A. But that's with 500 students on site. Now keep that in mind. One of the big things was the car queuing and trying to get the parking to work. We ran out of room is what it came down to. So we go to option 3, and option 3 was replacement at the GMS site. So building a new Griffin, then demolishing Griffin. It gives us a little bit more room. It pushes the building further back away from the road. But still, what we found was that there's too many kids on site, that there wasn't the ability to fix all the problems, the drainage, the car queuing, all that, it was still a problem on the site. Plus, we probably end up losing one of the play fields that the town uses a lot. Go on.
And the middle school.
Right, and the middle school uses a lot. Then we looked at replacement of Griffin, but on the middle school site. And what we found was that the middle school site, the open area that we identified, still had very high water table. So we're trying to get away from a high water table on the GMS site, only to go to another site that had even worse conditions. The lack of two driveways in, the going through a residential neighborhood, the fact that it didn't allow for any additional play area for the middle school, which is really a necessary thing right now, it would make that worse. So there was just too many students on that site for that to be viable. So option number 5, a new school on a new site, became the preferred option. At the time that we presented this, there was not a site available, but since then, the town has the school district has a purchase and sale on a new piece of property that I've looked at, I've walked several times, and studied, and feel it's a very viable site for a new school. So with the new sort of charter that we've been given to look at new options, I was at deliberative session. I heard people talk about, hey, why don't we move 7 and 8 up to the high school where we have additional capacity? And so I think it's a good thing that we're studying this. I really do. And so we've talked a little bit about what this entails. We'd move the 7th and 8th to the high school. There's enough capacity in the core facilities to handle the number of students. The school board would have to come up with a policy on how to separate the educational components and how to utilize the industrial art areas. But right now, my worksheets say that it's a viable option to do that. But then the ask was to convert LMS to a K or pre-K through 6. At this point, I feel confident in saying that I do not recommend it. That, as you saw on the plans, there is not a good location, an obvious location to put in addition that works well educationally for that building. And so if that ends up being the option that's selected, we would do the best we could, but I just feel that the district in the end would not be happy with the results.
And I would say even beyond educationally, geographically, I don't know that there was a good solution to the renovation on the property at LMS because of those property lines, all those pieces that you talked about. You're taking up 2/3 of our parking lot with an addition at this point in time.
Right, and when we looked at it last time for having a second school on the site, we determined that even though it feels like that's a big site, it's not. For the number of students, it's too congested. And after I looked at it, I feel that even with 2 less grades on there, it's still congested at pre-K through 6. And all the downsides that we had talked about before, the lack of presence in the community, it's hidden away. It takes up, the lack of egress. So going on to option 7, I thought, all right, the next logical step would be to say, all right, let's move the 7th and 8th grade up to the high school. Let's move 3rd and 4th grade up to the middle school, but then convert GMS to pre-K through 2 instead. The high school, we already said, works. If we're just shifting grades, my feeling is there would still need to be some renovations to convert the functionally obsolete areas into usable space. So the science,
Tech ed.
Yep. Those would have to be converted into, say, OTPT specialists, maybe. Well, and GM or LMS does not have classrooms that would be easily converted into kindergarten. You'd want a 1,000 square foot classroom for kindergarten, and most of the classrooms there are 900 square feet. So maybe we take some of those bigger spaces and divide them up into kindergarten, preschool. The location in the building isn't great for that, but
Need
it's.
some plumbing renovations too. 'cause
But you'd need some plumbing renovations.
Needs to be about It's like 18 inches smaller
Four
than a middle
inches
school
shorter,
toilet.
5 inches shorter.
Yeah, so if you don't spend a fair amount of money on renovating LMS as an elementary school, you'll end up with the same problem we had in option number 1 and 2, where you've got a functionally obsolete building. You know, at GMS right now, you've got the nurse in the old junior high lockers. You know, that's not an appropriate use.
School's in a science lab.
And so we don't want that to happen again at the middle school. So there's going to be some costs, and there's going to be some pain because some of the work that you just did is going to have to get torn apart again.
And you'd have a fax room where you're gonna put kindergartners in with ovens and
Right.
dishwashers and.
Exactly. So, I started looking at, but when we get to the elementary school, like what I was saying when we were talking about the plans, the elementary, or GMS doesn't change as drastically programmatically as far as, it's still got pre-K through 2 at least, but now the kids, there's fewer kids, 40% less, they're smaller. Pre-K through 2 would not have the same needs for the gymnasium. So the existing gymnasium that's half the size that you would want for the 5th and 6th, or, the older kids, actually works well for the younger kids. Some of the other spaces in there become reasonable size. Some stuff that's undersized now would be a reasonable size with the smaller population. We would,
I'm sorry, so you're talking about taking down part of GMS.
yes.
How many classrooms would you be taking down?
Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
And how many classrooms would you be building?
That I'm not exactly sure yet. I'd have to look through, and what we might do is look at, again, there's not that many 1,000-square-foot classrooms inside the existing building that could easily become a kindergarten or preschool. So we'd probably add those as an addition. It'd be a lot easier. The plumbing and that kind of stuff would be easier in an addition than it would be inside the existing
And then
building.
you have 1, 2, where 3, 4 is right now.
Yeah,
So with that scenario, then you build whatever classrooms and do whatever you have to do for it. Move 4, 5 up to middle school. Move 7, 8 to.
high school,
Is it 3, 4 up to
3,
Sorry,
4.
3, 4. What did I say?
3, 4, 5, 6 would be at the middle
Yeah.
school.
7, 8 would be at the high school.
High school.
Then you'd have to find someplace to put the SAU.
Griffin,
You just tore it down.
not the
old
30s
one.
building.
You're gonna put it in the 30s building?
And you gotta renovate the 30s building.
Or we'll have some portables that we own that.
I don't think it's big enough for the SAU.
You're going to have to deal with that one way or the other, I think. If you move the 7th and 8th up to the high school, you're probably going to want
No, I'm
to
just, in my
get
head,
the
just thinking like
SAU
the
out.
cost. You have to
Yeah.
redo GMS, then you have to go do LMS, then you have to go up and do the high school,
Right.
and then the SAU.
So the next logical step then is to go back to the option of doing a new school
Am I going down?
at the middle school site. So, yep, going to the next one.
A new school at the middle school site?
Yeah.
New
We already
smaller
did
school.
that.
No, so now instead of an
Smaller.
addition, it's a K2. Now, what's interesting, I should back up a second to Griffin, when it's a K through 2,
Oh,
again,
I
the
see.
kids are smaller, less impact on, say, the gymnasium, things like that. I'm not calling it an elementary school at that point, I'm calling it an early learning center.
Secondary school. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting concept. We could really focus in on the educational side of the design and design the building in such a way that's more appropriate for the smaller kids. It could be more residential looking, and it could have smaller spaces, things designed more for them that 3, 4, 5, and 6 would not need or would not want. And so I think it's kind of a cool grade break when you think about it that way, to do an early learning center. So if we do a separate building that's an early learning center at the middle school, it's smaller, it could possibly fit in that open area a little bit better. Now you've got synergy between the two schools because they're on the same site. But you've got all the same site problems, the egress issues, the entrance issue through the residential neighborhood, the high water table, all that stuff that was a problem with the early concepts are the problem here now. So then option 9, the last option is,
Gosh.
Just keep scrolling.
Running out of notebook.
is that concept again, but now instead of on the LMS site, it's on the Robin Riley site. So here's what I think is interesting, is that in terms of disruption, it's a little bit less because now you're building the new school and you're freeing up, and GMS just moves over. There's no disruption there. And maybe we could do something where, some grades shift around a little bit to make it a little bit easier to make some of the renovation work at the middle school. So you move the K through 2 up to the new school before you move 3 and 4 up. You do the renovations so that you can get some empty space at the middle school before you start making these moves around. All the benefits that you had in option 5 with the new school on the new site is we're moving the district a little closer to the town center. It's right across the street from this property. It's again least disruptive. The K2 is an interesting model. It would be a nice building that would be visible from the road. There's some really kind of nice aspects to this. The downside, the biggest downside, is what you just said a few minutes ago. Now we're impacting 3 sites. In option 5, where there was just the new elementary school, it was impacting 1 site. Now we're impacting 3 sites, and the cost
Option 9, you're
goes up.
impacting 4 sites.
Because of GMS?
Because you still have kids at GMS, LMS, and CHS, and now you have kids at a 4th site.
Right, but, net in the end,
Yeah.
we're really working on just 3 sites. Because we're not doing work at GMS. We're abandoning that eventually.
Depending on where the SAU.
No, I thought you were, oh, I see. Okay. Because you're moving up to
Right,
2. I
but-
got it.
9 is,
What's that?
option 9 is building a new one.
Yeah.
Right.
I still had 1st and 2nd at GMS, but I see they're moving to.
Right.
I got it.
Right.
Okay.
So educationally, it's a good option. But let's sort of pull it back for a second and talk about the educational side of things. I know the question is going to be, well, what's the cost? Which one's cheapest? Which one's more expensive? And my recommendation to you folks is that shouldn't be the first thing you talk about. The first thing you should talk about is what you want as an educational model. When we start to move kids from one spot to another, it's starting to feel like this is just a shell game of moving kids around to see what's most efficient and not really thinking about what the kids' experience is. In my mind, the grade split is very important, and the current, what we've got K through or pre-K through 4, 5 through 8, 9 through 12, you've got an almost even split, and so the students are moving only twice in their school career. With K through 6, 7 through 12, it's actually a little bit better because there's only 1 move. But that K6 is an enormous building. I don't feel comfortable recommending an elementary school of over, say, 500 to 600 students, and here's why. Once you get above around 450, you start to lose efficiency in the building. It may be counterintuitive. You might think, the bigger the building, the less cost for maintenance and operations and staffing, but it's not true. There's a point of diminishing returns. When you get above 400 to 500 students, you start to need more staff to cover the number of students. You might be losing a principal because you only have 1 school instead of 2, but now you're going to have 2 assistant principals to cover all the students that you've got. The one key area that I think is a little easier to get your head wrapped around is something like the cafeteria. We've talked about that a few times. If you've got an elementary school, if you've been in a cafeteria, an elementary school cafeteria that's got more than 125 to 150 students, you want earplugs. You want to take an Ativan before you go in there.
And you need an octopus to open all the milks and the
Right.
juice boxes and the.
So I'm starting to see any elementary school over 500 students with 2 cafeterias. And so now you got staff on both lines, you got two lines, there's more maintenance. It becomes a little bit more difficult. The supervision gets a little bit more difficult. You could add lunches, but if you're feeding kids starting at 10 o'clock until 2 o'clock, that's not healthy for the students either. So we're trying to limit the number of feedings to, say, 3 or 4 at the most, and trying to limit the size between 100 and 150. If there's 150 times 3, that's 450 students core capacity. So that means a 400 student school is what the sweet spot is for the size of an elementary school. You get above that, it gets more difficult.
So,
Sorry, can I just throw one other thing that
Yeah.
isn't being discussed?
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about student and teacher fatigue in construction. And you talk about LMS, which in my year and 3/4 at this point in time
Yeah.
that I've been here, we've been under construction almost the entire time with more to look forward to.
Right.
If I go back to my school today and say, guess what, we're going to be under construction again for the next 2 to 3 years, I'm going to have to hold on to some people's ankles to make sure that they want to stay, because it's a lot to go under construction.
Yeah.
And in all of these models, you're not only disrupting the learning of the students and the functioning of the people at work, but you're doing it across 3 buildings
Yes.
versus building the new school while GMS is still up and running, as is.
Right.
I put it in air quotes because you have issues
Making the best.
making the best of what you have, but moving and having them be able to go into a pristine new school, it doesn't impact 2 other schools in what needs to happen. I just have to talk about that component and how that impacts people, because the people are what education is about. It's the buildings is this much, the people is a lot.
So Kyle, just touching on option 9, because you mentioned option 9 would disrupt 3 schools. It actually would only be 2, correct? Because you would build a new P through 2 on the new site,
You're right.
and then you move 3 forward. Another option was all 3, but,
It would drop 2 and then 1, because then,
well, you do
It-
P2, then you move,
Educationally, it only disrupts 2 schools. Construction-wise, it impacts 3 sites.
what would it impact if you move 3, 4 up to the middle school?
Because you still have to do some renovations in order to convert the specialty rooms into something that's usable for those grades.
And the
And
playground
then you
and
need a
the
playground. and-
parking.
All
and
that, yeah. So, I'm glad you brought all that up, because that's been what I've been thinking about too, and it's hard from my standpoint to say that, but I think it's very, very, very important to be thinking about. My recommendation out of all this is still number 5, which is build a new school on a new site. It only impacts 1 site. It doesn't impact any school in terms of construction. It's not the cheapest, it's not the most expensive. It's somewhere in the middle.
No, but I think it's what made us decide that, as far as needing a new school, like you touch on it, the education part is the most important, not the money. To a lot of people in town, the money is gonna be the most important thing. To a lot of people, the education that they'll provide is gonna be the most important thing. So they're torn. I mean, it's been that way for a long time in this town.
Yeah.
But when I was on the board, and,
Yeah.
for years, in the discussion as far as the new school and the need for it,
Yeah.
aside from the fact that GMS is in such a disrepair,
Yeah.
it's just the educational portion of it.
So again, I recommend number 5. I'd say as a runner-up would be renovating GMS. It is the least expensive,
With less kids, with less grade levels.
with less grade levels. To still move 7th and 8th up to the high school, to move 3 and 4 up to the middle school, and to renovate GMS for K through 2. I think it's viable. I think it's less expensive because you're reusing as much as you can of existing structures. New construction is very expensive. Every number that I'm getting in recently is new construction is around $400 a square foot. Renovations is whatever the building needs. I was throwing a large number at renovations at GMS of somewhere between $200 and $250 a square foot. So a pretty healthy amount that would make that building look like a new building. It wouldn't look like the GMS that you see right now.
And then-
One of the questions someone's gonna ask is, okay, what would it cost to renovate GMS, to renovate LMS, and to construct for 7th and 8th grade and everything you need at the high school in comparison to a new school? They're gonna look for like a ballpark figure, like.
Oh, yeah, no, I'll come up with the costs. I just wanted to, I'm just not ready to give up actual numbers yet. I've done enough to know where things fit in a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that the whatever number it was, number 7.
7 was move LMS to high school, move 3, 4 to LMS, and redo GMS.
Yeah, number 7 is probably gonna be the least expensive, because it has more existing structure that we can reuse. Actually, the K through 6 at LMS is probably gonna be the most expensive. People were thinking that's gonna be the least expensive, because you're consolidating. It's not the least expensive because you've gone past that point of diminishing returns, that the building is too big. We'd have to do something in order to group the insides together a little bit better than just simply slapping on something next to the gymnasium. We'd have to redo where the main lobby is, the main office, all that stuff that just built a few years ago would go away.
So,
Portable classrooms? You can get some tents really cheap.
so,
ESAU, classroom, you know?
Right.
so when you're thinking about like redoing GMS, for P through 2, are you considering like gutting the school?
Yeah. Well, and back to the disruptions.
Plumbing, everything?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, all new.
Yeah, so when you say it's gonna look nicer or look new, it's also gonna be much more efficient as
Yes.
well. So we're demolishing the parts which are energy efficient, the drafts, the water, and then we're
Well, the
getting,
only- right, the only thing keeping
putting
it
that money into that
But
shell.
also, and this is the thing, in that option, GMS would be the last building that is worked on, because all the other things have to happen in order for us to play the shell game with the students, to move
So
them
that's
here, to
waiting.
renovate here. So now GMS, the building that's in most repair, is gonna get worked on the last.
Well, and where would you put the kids? I mean,
The only way to do it is, honestly, it would be like the part that we're the worst part of the building, we'd have to hold on to because we'd move them all
Yeah.
there while we renovate, and then we'd move them back, and then we destroy. But in order to do that, we'd have to have the middle school already upgraded so we could send 3rd and 4th, so we open up that space to
No,
move
but
these kids
the
around.
existing classrooms would be demolished also. You're gonna go through, you're gonna gut that entire building.
No, that's what I said.
No,
So
but after-
we would have to
after,
have
yeah.
7 and 8 move to the high school so that
You have to build that.
so
first.
that we'd have to do the high school, so 7 and 8 could move out of the middle school and go up there. And then we need to have the middle school done so that we could get rid of 3rd and 4th at GMS.
Right.
Because then you'd have half the building free, so we'd move pre-K through 2 into the worst part of the building, while we updated the less worst part of the building to make it all updated. Then we can move them back, and then the bulldozer could
So
come in
how
and
many
knock
years are we
down.
talking about?
In the meantime,
to
you
do
know,
this
you're putting
project.
HVAC, your plumbing, your electrical, and everything else, and
Yeah.
updating and changing.
Yeah.
Putting a sprinkler system in and. so
Rough
forth.
estimate, I think I count out that we have this plan in place in 8-9 years.
9 years, not quite that long.
No,
but-
no, from today's date.
yeah.
If we say that this is the plan we go forward,
Yeah.
and we put the bond, or 3 bond, I don't even know if you do one, you put it all together next year, it passes, so then you start working on the high school,
Yeah.
and that takes a year, and then you can move the middle school, and then that takes a year and a half, so then you're at 4 years basically, and then you start, and then it's a year here, and so, I'm sorry, I was being 6 to 7 years.
And that's only if everything goes smoothly and according to plan, and
Right.
there's no supply issues, and everything comes in on time.
And we don't have one electrical switch that's made in Ukraine, or wherever, you know.
Right.
Missouri.
And over on a
I think it was
rowboat.
Missouri.
So I think that,
Is that available online, do I get, the old report?
Do we have it? Did you?
you have it, yeah.
Okay.
Can I get a copy?
Yeah. Yeah,
Did you send it to me?
I got a copy.
I don't know where it is.
all the markups on it, though.
Is that is it in the drive? I didn't get an email
I
with
didn't see
I
it.
don't
Send it to
know
Doug.
if
presentation.
Mike, do you know if that's up live? Can I stop the presentation? Are we done?
Yeah, we're all done.
Okay.
Thanks, Kyle.
It's very rough. I did it as fast as I could, and again, I was told to do one option. I did an extra 3 on top of that, but I think it's necessary, and I hope that it spurs some dialogue, and that people that had a foregone conclusion will see that maybe some of those things aren't really what they expected.
So Mike, the question was, is this document that we just presented someplace where the public can find it?
Got it this afternoon, so we will get it posted with more details on the Reimagining GMS area, because that's like our storing place for all of this stuff.
Yeah, we could have the notes and narrative that go along with the visuals.
Or reimagining the school district at this point.
Yeah, new site,
Yeah. Well, and, you know, I'd heard, well, hey, you know, this could be good if we're doing work at the middle school, because we gotta redo the parking lot, and I'm thinking, well, all right, now the scope is creeping. You know, if we added that back into our first 5, saying, all right, if we don't touch the middle school, but we're still gonna redo the parking lot, what's that cost gonna be? So you can't take out some work from one option and call that cheaper, because no, you're just hiding it. So if there's work at the middle school that has to happen regardless, then all right, let's talk about it, but don't saddle some other option with that work.
You know, the other thing too is that you keep talking about construction and, you know, the interference. And the thought of, you know, the middle school right now, then they have to go through it and being a little bit older. I couldn't imagine like smaller children going through that type of construction while still trying to get an education.
Well, and that's why I said it had to be last, because they would be moved over to almost be sheltered from all that work, you know, like
They'd be sheltered, but really wouldn't be sheltered either. I mean, it's still.
Right.
they would, as much as middle schoolers walking amongst the ceiling, it would almost be like, if you can imagine GMS on the inside,
Yeah.
when you come down the little ramp by the music room, there'd be like a tarp or like a half, like
Right.
that would be where we're functioning out of. And if that meant the main office was a couple of tables by the 30s building entry, like we would have to function out of that building alone while they gutted everything else. And, or, you know, the office and the gym, there'd be a lot of outside.
Yeah.
And
And
around
then that's,
and
talk about
outside.
Homeland Security, and talk about all of those components that we're not even addressing in any of these scenarios of having buildings under construction has an impact on that. You know, we're in a day and age where
There's a
safety
big
and
valley
security.
between should we do it and can we do it.
There is one other thing I wanted to mention, and that is the building aid. We have again, I had mentioned earlier, we've got the letter of intent to fund. It gives us a range. I'm feeling fairly confident you would end up getting the $7 million figure because of inflation that's been going on. But we're still waiting for the legislature to vote that in. But I've been tracking what they're doing, and it seems pretty likely they basically took the $48 million they originally put in the budget and trimmed it down to $43 million, which just happens to exactly match the top 3 ranked projects. However, in the letter, it also states that if a project fails to pass their project, that money would shift to the next in line. And that goes through not just this biennium, but into future bienniums. So once you're on the list, as long as you continue to support your project, you stay on the list and are likely, if not guaranteed, to get the money eventually. So it's important, if you want $7 million from the state, to keep supporting the project, to stay on the list. I'm not sure what the final requirement is to support it, whether you actually have to pass the bond, and I think that is what they're looking for, is a passed vote saying you're going to build the project. You can say it in such a way that it's contingent on getting state building aid, but that vote needs to happen, and it needs to happen before the end of this biennium, meaning that you've only got one more chance to do that, next March. So if you don't pass this project next March, you will have to reapply for state building aid, and at that point, we know that there were 17 projects last round. There's probably going to be another 17 new ones. There could be another, if there were 4 in front of you this time, there could be another 4 in front of you next time. We know that 1 or 2 or more of them might stay on the list, so you could end up being back 7 or 8 in the list if you have to reapply. So there's a sense of urgency that I'd like people to be aware of. I think $7 million for the project is a big deal, and that most people would want to have that money in order to do this project. So if that's the case, then there's a need for the community to rally behind one of these options, whatever option it is.
You know what really stinks about that too is when when we first talked and first walked through one of the projects, how much the cost has escalated.
Yeah.
It's eaten up that $7 million plus.
Yep, it has. From November of 2019 to November of 2022, it was a 42% increase in construction costs. And I got that from the FRED website, at the Federal Reserve Economic Data website. It's out of the Federal Reserve out of St. Louis. They break it down into many, many different categories, and I found one specifically for cost of construction. Now, what's doubly interesting is that since November of 2022 to today, 6 months, it's only been about 2 or 3%. So the curve went like this and then flattened right off for the last 6 months. Is it going to stay like that? Is it going to come down a little? It's probably not going to come down a little bit. But if it plateaus and stays flat.
Eggs came down, construction.
Yeah, hopefully what we estimate today will be good next year. But yeah, we can't promise that it's going to stay that way for very long.
Construction costs has gone crazy, all over. I deal with it every day.
And now it's not just the cost, but the supply chain issues
Yeah,
that
supply chain is the big issue on a lot of things.
I have a project. They were going to put in an existing building, an existing high school. They're going to replace the unit ventilators.
Mm-hmm.
They ordered the unit ventilators months ago. We found out yesterday they're back ordered. You'll get them. I don't know when. So that's what we're dealing with all over the place.
A lot of that's going on. The only thing they know how to build today fast is a home. Anything beyond that, you can't get parts for it.
No.
And even some of the homes, I think when we were talking to the electric companies that we're working with at LMS, even some of the homes are having trouble getting those switches and power pieces that even for the small residential areas.
Have you bought a piece of plywood lately?
Yes.
It's
Guys left
crazy.
them getting what they need. The monkey being dragged across the sky, you see them all the time. You know, the helicopters, those parts alone, they having a hard time to get here. That's why they are behind on that project. I like the kayak, that'll be fun.
I don't know. I don't think I'd want to hang from that helicopter over
Oh, geez.
that many volts
Put
on
a
a
lot
power
of
line.
trust in that pilot.
So what do you folks think?
I think you've given us a lot to think about. I think,
All right, great.
yeah, thank you for that and all the work that you put into it. It's a lot.
Even though it wasn't what you were expecting, hopefully it's what you need, and you'll
Right.
come up with a good decision from it.
Big
It-
picture.
It's saying that we're not making a rash decision and it's not going, just build a new building because that's what we think.
Well, it's counterintuitive. You know, again, when I was at deliberative session, I heard somebody say, well, why don't we consolidate schools? It'll save money. I thought, that's a reasonable request.
Right,
It
right.
really is. And so it's worth taking the time to study it.
Yeah.
It's surprising to find out it's not the most cost-effective. And so I think I hope people are open to hearing that.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate it. I think,
Make a point.
Go ahead, Mike.
David.
Where's Mike?
Just, I just want to emphasize sort of the urgency of this, right?
Yes.
If we're going to decide on a project and have something in front of voters in March, we've done our due diligence pretty quickly on this idea of consolidation. But I'm going to urge the public one more time, because we had all those public sessions a winter ago where we invited people in, and consolidation was never really put on the table by anybody. So I would just ask, if we didn't get this right, if there's some part of consolidation that somebody in the public wants to raise and poke at, now is the time to do it, because that window is going to close. We have got to get a game plan to protect our stake in building aid and to be making headway on the project. So I would just urge anybody watching this, if you have an idea, we didn't bet something that you think we should bet, now is the time to speak up. An email to the school board, is vital in the next few weeks so that we can do our work and start keeping, keep making headway on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody, I don't know if everybody was able to hear that, but Mike was just saying that, time is of the essence. We
Yes.
need to decide if it's a viable option, which one is the best option for our community and for our district, and we need to decide that soon, because we don't want to lose our stake in state building aid. So if anybody, any member of the public thinks that we missed something, we didn't look at an option that we should have vetted, please come forward and, come to a school board meeting, send an email to the school board. And we want to make sure that we have done our due diligence on all fronts before we move forward with a plan to be on the ballot in March. Did I capture that, Mike? Maybe.
I think you did.
Thank you, Doug. I would say yes. All right, well, thank you for that. Anything else from members? Any other feedback or questions for Kyle?
I would just, that's it, I would encourage our representatives in budget committee and selectmen to try to continue this conversation with your
Please.
committees as well. Just so I think it's gonna, I mean,
It involves the whole.
it's not just, it's just us committee getting the marching orders, it's
There's
really,
three sides to this whole thing, and you all said it tonight, okay? We do this, we do that, we do this, okay, or we do four, okay? The cost of doing the renovations and all that is high compared to the cost of doing new construction. Okay, square foot wise, there's a big difference there, if I recall it like, being a building inspector for 44 years, okay?
Kevin, can I ask you just to come over here so that the mic can pick you up? Because I want anyone watching this meeting to be able to hear your input. Yes, we do.
I just think between the selectmen, the budget committee, school board, and this subcommittee, the school board, I think this is really the location where we can all rally around, but also
Work together as a team.
work together as a team, but also get the feedback from, that's four public options for public to come out and speak and have their voice be heard, so that we all know, 3 committees and a subcommittee get our kind of marching orders from the public. What do we want to rally around and get behind as a community?
The key factor here is it's one town.
Yeah.
You got school, you got that, but it's still one town. That's the key part, okay? And we gotta work as a team, both sides, okay? Because the selectmen are gonna want, they got other issues, as we all know, people do strange things, okay? Okay, and we have to go through this process, but I like to work as a team effort. That's why we're on the group. That's why I'm here. Okay, I'm going to relay that back to the board too, as much. Okay, but this is all together new right now. This is just a preliminary from what I see right here. Okay, looking at if we did this, and that. Would it be good to going new? These are things that have to be weeded out. And can you understanding construction cost, okay, and the way it is today, and the way I understand construction today is the renovation is not the simplest thing in the world. It never has been, okay? And there's a lot of history in this town related to the Griffin School. I too graduated from there, okay? And the 7th, 8th, and the 6th grade was in the brick building. And our class sizes were 30 all the way through. Okay, so we don't believe in this 20 thing. No, we'd like to be closer. Okay, but
I've offered you to come to the middle school and see what a class of 30 would look like. Spend 5 minutes, be a substitute. We could use those
There's
too.
only one class.
yeah, all my classes were like that all the way through,
Yeah.
from first grade on. Okay, and I was looking at the layout here, and oh yeah, we're still there. I calculated which grades were which all the way through. But my point is, we got to understand that it's expensive, no matter how you look at it. Okay, but we got to look at the best approach in the long run. And what's going to happen if we don't use the Griffin School? What is going to happen there?
Right.
What can that be used for? Okay, for the school, for the town as a whole, or the whole 9 yards. Pickleball? Okay, I just mean that. But I'm just saying, okay, there's a lot of things here.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm gonna go back and relay that.
Thank
Okay.
you. Yeah.
I like to be involved with this as much as I can. You guys are gonna meet over and over and over, I take it?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, just so you know, the sheets that you have is just the tip of the iceberg. That
I understand.
all those have multiple worksheets behind it that back it up, that comes to the conclusions.
Well, those are things that are gonna have to come out through the discussion. People are
Yeah.
gonna want that, know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to show all that right now because it can get confusing, and also a small error here or a change in the number here trickles down into everything, and I want to get enough feedback from the district that I can solidify those options, so that way I can finally give you what the cost differences are.
I'd say I appreciate, and I know time is of the essence and we need to move, but I appreciate having this level of information. Let that simmer for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then layer on a bit more information and
Yeah.
let that simmer for a
Yeah.
little bit, you know?
All good things take time.
Yeah.
One time is of the essence in the same
Time.
breath.
Speaking of time, I'll motion to adjourn.
I
Not
second.
out of order.
That's fine with me. That is, no. All right, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Yeah,
Opposed, abstain.
the New England way.
All right, and with that, we'll end our meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for, is it 5:21? No, it wouldn't be.
5:24?
5:24. I'm a math tutor.
Which is also the school board meeting that night.
I'm straight, I'm just sitting, I'm just gonna move over there.